Welcome to the Josh Button Podcast, where we discuss health, wellness, and outliers from society. Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Josh Button Podcast. This is episode 47, and today, on my mind, I have something very specific I want to ask you. Are the thought leaders in our world educated or indoctrinated? What's the difference? Let's be honest. Look, first things first, I want you to think about this very carefully. The most educated individuals in your life, how did they react to the COVID pandemic? How were they a beacon of leadership during this time? When everyone broke out the mask and were socially distancing, and some people were putting gloves on and constantly lathering themselves up in hand sanitizers and whatnot, how did those leaders perform, and how did they rise to the challenge? Did they live a life in fear? Did they participate in some of these things that we just know to be absurdities? Did they go out and get the vaccine as soon as it was possible? These are all relevant and pertinent questions. Today I propose to you the idea that the days of certifications, PhDs, masters, and degrees being the, beacon of an authority figure and enabling them to be the ones we should look to, and only them, to be discussing subject matter, especially within their areas of expertise. And this week alone, I had 4-5 posts taken down off social media. And it wasn't just my opinions that were being taken down. It wasn't myself that was being censored. I mean, who am I, right? It would be no big deal if it was just me putting out some crazy worldview that they just said, it's not important for people to hear. But these were not my own words. These were posts with direct quotes from the horse's mouth of people that were once very recently respected by the establishment, embraced by the establishment, promoted by the establishment. Dr. Peter McCullough, Tucker Carlson, Brett Weinstein, and Professor Fukushima, a Japanese oncologist who also, was a leader of his field, one of the greatest and the best and most respected in Japan. He's done autopsies, and his reports on the autopsies, they were censored. And I couldn't wrap my head around how I took these 4 individuals and words directly from the mouths, and in Tucker Carlson's case, an interview that he was doing that it wasn't debatable subject matter. It was matter of fact. It was things that were pertinent and happening right now. Some of the manufacturers of these medical interventions have walked back or removed their product from the marketplace because they had no choice, because they had to admit they were doing more harm than good. These individuals have spent years and years and years studying in their field. They became respected individuals in their own areas of expertise. And they shared information that the censors have labeled as misinformation. So, in my opinion, the establishment is eating its own. Not only that, I think they're, inadvertently enlightening some of us. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the time for us to feel better harboring an opinion that has been given to us by a respected thought leader or an expert in their field is all over. It has proven to be more damaging than good in a lot of cases. If you were listening to the embraced, models and the embraced propaganda, which we've learned it to be, then you were probably unhealthier than you were healthy in the last few years. We all want to be feeling good about the decisions we make. We all want studies, peer-reviewed studies. We want literature. We want experts to confirm things that we are going to make important decisions upon. However, that model has failed us. We've seen time and time again that these models are bought and paid for, that a study can be manipulated, if not bought and paid for from the get-go, to achieve a result that will benefit those who are funding it in the first place. If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And most of the time, that's where the studies are formulated, in the areas that are going to generate the most profit. Look, in the beginning of the pandemic, we saw that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and other modalities that were viewed as long-standing, even holistic approaches that were viewed as less invasive and less risky they were put by the wayside by the establishment. They were mocked, they were ridiculed. And years later, we come to learn that for no good reason at all, other than they would cost profits for the pharmaceutical giants themselves. I don't want to make the claim that they're all in on it. And this is across various subjects, various subject matter. There are thought leaders who have studied diligently for years in their area of expertise and who have memorized and worked on quite an abundant amount of material. Well, I'm here to suggest that some of the foundations for these fields of study were flawed from the beginning. Intentionally, unintentionally, it doesn't really matter. It really doesn't. If you're basing all of your expertise upon something that is flawed from the get-go, something that is incorrect, something that was bought and paid for by somebody who is going to make profit, well, you are going to mislead the public and mislead yourself. I heard a great analogy in a debate a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to do my best to relay it to you here. Imagine that you grow up your entire life and to you're 18, 19 years old, and your parents raise you your entire life, and that's all you know. And then one day, you find in your home, in the midst of their paperwork, some adoption papers, and it's clearly for yourself. You have lived 18 plus years of your life believing that these are your biological parents, and now you know they aren't. So you relay this information to a friend, and you let them know, hey, I found these adoption papers. And your friend says, well, that's kind of irrelevant. Who are your real parents then? And you go, oh, I don't know who my real parents are. All I know is that these are my adopted parents. And your friend refuses to accept this because you haven't named who your exact parents are. Ladies and gentlemen, we're stuck in this situation to a very, very large degree in multiple areas and lots of various different subject matter. A lot of people will continue to believe those are your parents until you absolutely definitively introduce them to your real parents. Knowing what you know about the adoption papers and not being able to prove who your real parents are in that moment leaves you in a funny predicament. A position where you're not necessarily being believed by others because you can't prove to them what they need to be proven to understand or to know. It's a really wild thing to think about in that way, because a lot of people are just continuing to believe the lie. Even though there's evidence to suggest that these are lies or these are falsehoods, these are wrong, unless they are given the parallel information and the absolute proof, they will continue to believe the lie. They will hold on to the lie as if it is, well, essential to their well-being. We see this in science. We see this in pharmaceuticals. I posted something that went, for my account, viral. Borderline viral for most accounts, I think. It had 350,000 views in the first few days or something. And it was Pastor John MacArthur suggesting and saying that ADHD and OCD were, well, they were fake, or he used a different word. They weren't real. And what he was trying to say is that, look, people have symptoms all the time, symptoms that coincide with ailments or with certain other people's symptoms. But pharmaceuticals had hijacked these symptoms to create diagnoses to sell medication. And this is the pure and simple fact of the matter. You may be holding on to a diagnosis that you believe describes your ailment and your personal afflictions. But if you're holding on to that with the thought process that you are broken, that you have to have this pharmaceutical intervention for any kind of remedy to your situation, well, then perhaps you'll never heal. Perhaps the symptoms that you are attaching to a diagnosis are now yours for life, and perhaps you cannot overcome them, and perhaps you will be dependent on pharmaceutical. And what happens when a young child is diagnosed with something and then given stimulants and then moved from stimulants into another thing? What happens when they're 20 years into these afflictions that were diagnosed and the only remedies that were ever offered by the persons doing the diagnosis were pharmaceutical interventions that left them dependent and most likely created other symptoms and side effects and other ailments? Look, we are all challenged in life. We all have afflictions. We all have suffering. We all have grief. We all have stumbling blocks, and we all have challenges. And we are all unique in those challenges. In my opinion, the people that we think have the least amount of challenges have a far different set of challenges from what you do. I worked with a couple guys that I told this, 5 years ago or so. Like, you think your life is perfect, other people think your life is perfect, but I guarantee you the challenges that you will have will just be unique to yourselves. You will have them. We do not escape life without suffering or challenges. We do not escape life without ailments. We do not escape life without trauma. No one does. And yes, some cases are worse than others. But that doesn't mean that we are in any way, shape, or form lacking a pharmaceutical intervention, or that we should all be prescribed some pharmaceutical intervention for most of these common ailments, or most of your even individual irrational fears and anxiety and stresses and things that you are having trouble dealing with from time to time or in periods of your life. Do not hold on to these things, acknowledge them, and see what makes sense for you to grow from or to, do about them. There are a plethora of areas which I believe we're ignoring. We're not necessarily exploring because of the models that are offered to us, like pharmaceutical interventions. I think a problem that hasn't been addressed in mainstream as much as it should would be parasites. And there's a lot of information online now and people that are doing diligent work in the field who are using things like ivermectin, ironically enough, to do parasite cleanses and having absolute health breakthroughs for individuals. This isn't discussed widely enough or, directly enough because it doesn't really profit pharma and it doesn't profit the powers that be. And when you're dealing with a business model that kind of doesn't make sense to remedy you if you're going to be a customer for life without those remedies, what is their incentive to heal? What is their incentive to fix your ailment? I don't think they have one. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of failure, especially recently, is people are going to the wrong areas for healing. They're not going to the right direction, the right expert, the right persons who might look for the underlying cause. And the underlying cause is what we all want to address, really, sincerely, deep down. If you want to lose weight, you would love to understand why your metabolism and your metabolic function isn't what it once was, or isn't what you would like it to be. Do you not want to remedy the actual issue, the underlying issue that causes the symptoms that you're dealing with? I think we all want that. I don't think this is very confusing. I don't even understand. I don't even think that the doctors and the people within those fields who are doing what they have been taught to do think they're doing anything wrong. I think they believe the lie. I think they believe that your real parents, not your adopted parents, are the answer because that's what they've studied throughout your first 18 years of life, to bring that analogy back around. All kinds of subject matter, I believe this applies to. And these credentialed and respected and once embraced by the establishment individuals that are now being censored, they've stepped out of line. They realize some of the things that they were taught, some of the things that they have studied were based upon a foundation of flawed and errored possibilities, theories, things that now they know they cannot continue to say, they cannot continue to repeat. They have to go where their evidence has led them. And now they're being labeled as misinformation. They're being slandered, in my opinion. And the consequences of this are absolutely, well, they're mortal. They're death. They are illness. They are grave. And at some point in time, I do hope a constitutional lawyer or the system in itself does turn the eyes of truth to the root causes of these things, to the foundations of the principles that are being shared, and addresses them. And if there's criminality, well, yes, by all means, let's hold people accountable. But also just share the truth and stop the censorship and stop the labels of misinformation because they differ in what your belief system is. And a lot of these people do have belief systems, just as much as any religion, just as much as anything that you could possibly hold true and almost refuse at all costs to give up or to even inspect, alternate views. I think that's one of the most interesting thing about the far-fetched conspiracy theories is that you don't meet too many people that are really out there with far-fetched conspiratorial minds or with beliefs that are just really, in most people's opinions, far-fetched, that didn't believe the same as what the mainstream accepted ideologues promote now. Let's be honest. In my opinion, nobody chooses to be a flat earther. Nobody wants to be a flat earther. Nobody chooses to think that their doctors, know a lot of stuff that's not really relevant to fixing them or to healing them. But they've been failed, or they've seen things that they had to pursue that led them to these new beliefs. Sign of intelligence is being able to entertain two conflicting ideas without being attached to either. To study, to observe, to follow, and disseminate fact from fiction, to follow the evidence, no matter where that leads them. I know for a fact most people are not going to be capable of going down some of the extreme wormholes that, we're probably going to need to address here in the next few years. It's just not going to happen. But let's start with health and wellness. Let's start with what the root causes for some of these symptoms are. And if we can start healing some of the symptoms through other modalities that are not accepted in the mainstream, who knows what doors that's going to open for all of us and for future generations, for that matter. Diet, hydration, the nutrients and the minerals that we're missing from our bodies, the lifestyles, the activities that we're engaging in, those that we're neglecting, grounding, sun. People avoid the sun at all costs when we know the sun is healing. People don't ground. We're not taught the correct things about the earth and the world around us. And we've adopted all kinds of habits and lifestyles that are just, they're in conflict with who we are and what this place is. I believe that our time is now. Our time is now. It's now or never. We're either going to hold on to the things that we were taught that were based on a really weak foundation, or we're going to branch out and follow where the evidence may lead us. Look, nothing's easy. No decisions are easy for anyone that especially has to do with your health and your life. But if you're open to all the possibilities and you're willing to explore all the options holistically, and those that are kind of shunned by mainstream, especially those who profit far more from selling you, well, medicines and selling you products. These are nothing more than products. And their markup is incredible. I saw something the other day about the doctors that were incentivized $250,000 to have 70% of their patient base, their client base, vaccinated. And then you understand why they pushed it so much so. It wasn't because they were doing their due diligence and researching the product. It was because they were incentivized heavily financially. And that's unfortunate. What isn't unfortunate is that the people that abstained from these things are healthy, are healthier, are not suffering from some of the consequences that those that decided to take them are. And it's not fun. It's not happy. It's not something to gloat about. It's extremely unfortunate that anyone would be injured by these things. But it's better to root it out of society in its entirety right now. The consequences of inaction, the consequences of silencing information that counters the narrative of those that profit the most off of our dis-ease is great. In my opinion, it is almost fortunate that the establishment has labeled and censored and gone after some of these individuals because they're eating their own and they're showing the entire backdrop of Oz. Pay no mind to that man behind the curtain? Well, that man behind the curtain has exposed himself. He will eat his own to maintain power. When his own starts going against him, no matter what their messaging is, he will do his best to put his foot on them. To the leaders that I mentioned in these posts, you have been, in my opinion, you've been slandered. You've been labeled improperly. And we're grateful for your sacrifice. And there's many people like me who on social media have rejected the consequences of sharing it over and over and over again against the community guidelines, against the strikes on our accounts, and against the censorship that does indeed roll downhill. But the consequences of not pursuing and not sharing are far greater than those if we continue and if we lose our accounts and if we are slandered right along with you. That's my thoughts for today. I am looking forward to part 2 with the boys coming up here from 90210X Vanity. We should be getting into that within the next week or so. I'm Josh Button. Thanks for joining me. Talk to you all again soon.